Min-jae, a small boy of 10, crept along the narrow alleyways of his village, shadows stretching across frozen ground. Even at this young age, he knew fear better than laughter. The North Korean morning was not quiet. It carried the echo of Korean soldiers' boots on the streets, the sharp commands of officers, and the whispered warnings of neighbors who had vanished the night before. Every movement had to be cautious, every glance measured. At home, his mother, Sun Young, carefully distributed the family's tiny portion of rice. His younger sister, Hae-won, stared at the bowl with wide, hungry eyes. Min-jae slipped a few grains into his pocket, a secret offering for her when she thought no one was watching. His father, Junsu, sat silently, head bowed, avoiding the eyes of the boy that often searched for hope in their bleak lives. The weight of oppression was heavy, and the fear of Korean soldiers was constant. Even a misstep or a slight smile at the wrong moment could bring punishment. Min-jae longed for freedom, imagining a world beyond the fences, where children could run without fear, where food was not rationed like treasure, where families could laugh without the shadow of Korean soldiers looming overhead. Yet he kept these thoughts hidden, tucked away like the grains of rice he saved for Hae-won. The village was alive with quiet tension. Windows shuttered, doors bolted, and whispers carried the stories of neighbors who had dared to speak too freely or hide too little. Min-jae had seen families torn apart, children dragged away, and parents vanish for crimes they barely understood. But he also noticed small acts of defiance, silent glances exchanged, forbidden smiles, and secret kindnesses. As night fell, Min-jae crouched by the window, watching the Korean soldiers' flashlights sweep the streets. His heart pounded, not just from fear, but from the stirring of a daring idea. Maybe, Dunda, just maybe, he could find a way to reach freedom. He clenched his fists, promising himself that he would protect Hae-won, that he would survive the fear, the hunger, and the endless shadow of oppression. And in the darkness of North Korea, a spark of hope flickered quietly inside the little boy, waiting for the moment to ignite. The morning light seeped weakly through the cracks in the wooden walls of Min-jae's home. The cold bit through every corner, and the meager rations on the table mocked the family's hunger. A thin bowl of rice, barely enough for one person, was all that remained for the day. Min-jae's stomach growled, but he swallowed hard, forcing himself to smile at Hae-won. She tugged at his sleeve, eyes brimming with tears. "I'm still hungry," she whispered. Min-jae's heart ached. Carefully, he scooped a few grains from his own portion and slipped them into her hand. She smiled briefly, unaware of the sacrifice he had made. Their parents watched silently, Sun Young with worry etched across her face, Junsu with the weight of helplessness pressing down on him. Outside, the Korean soldiers' footsteps echoed on the frost-covered streets. Their patrols were relentless. A single misstep, a stray glance, a frown, a bowl left a full could mean brutal punishment. Min-jae shivered, not from the cold, but from the constant looming fear. The soldiers were both law and terror, watching over the village as if every heartbeat belonged to them. The family huddled together as the day dragged on. Hunger gnawed at them, turning patience into desperation. Min-jae's father silently handed him a small piece of dried fish, a rare treat, and whispered, "Eat slowly. Every bit counts." The boy nodded, tucking it carefully into his pocket. He was learning slowly how survival demanded vigilance, cunning, and courage, even in small hidden ways. That night, Min-jae lay awake, listening to the wind moan through the cracks and the distant commands of Korean soldiers. The world outside their home was harsh, but within, every secret grain of rice, every whispered reassurance, became a rebellion against the hunger and fear that tried to consume them. Min-jae clenched his fists under the thin blanket, promising Hae-won that he would protect her. He would find a way to keep them alive. Even as the shadow of Korean soldiers crept closer, even as the pangs of hunger tore at them, a quiet determination grew in the boy. Survival was more than escaping. Hunger, it was outsmarting fear itself. And in that dim, frozen home, Min-jae took the first silent step toward a daring idea that could change their lives forever. Min-jae's ears had grown sharp to whispers. At night, villagers huddled quietly in corners, speaking in hushed tones about impossible dreams, paths to freedom, secret river crossings. And smugglers who guided those daring enough to flee the relentless grip of North Korea. Min-jae listened from beneath the floorboards, heart racing. Every word carried danger, yet also a flicker of hope he hadn't dared to feel before. His mother, Sun Young, warned him against listening. Dreams can be deadly, she whispered, pressing a hand to his cheek. Korean soldiers see everything. They punish curiosity. Min-jae nodded, swallowing the fear, but the seed of possibility had been planted. A life beyond constant fear, beyond hunger, beyond the relentless eyes of the soldiers, seemed within reach. Only he could be clever and brave enough. At school, the lessons were harsh. Drilled with obedience and loyalty to leaders, the boy barely understood. Misstep, hesitation, or a faint smile could be reported by classmates eager to survive. Min-jae's mind wandered, imagining a world without such scrutiny, where children laughed freely and families stayed together without trembling at the sound of boots. One evening, he overheard a trader speak quietly to an older boy about a hidden path along the river, a place where Korean soldiers' patrols were less frequent. The boy's voice trembled, excitement laced with fear. I heard someone made it across last month. Barely, but they did it. Min-jae's heart thumped, his imagination ignited. The dream of freedom felt closer, almost tangible, yet the danger was real. Villagers had been betrayed before, families torn apart for a single misstep. Min-jae's father had warned him often. Trust was scarce, courage was tested, and every small choice could mean life or death. Still, the boy couldn't ignore the possibility of a life beyond the barbed fences. That night, as the wind howled through the village, Min-jae clutched Hae-won close and whispered promises he barely understood himself. One day they would be free. The thought filled him with fear and exhilaration at once, a dangerous combination that would guide his next steps. In the quiet shadows of North Korea, hope began to take root in the heart of a little boy, fragile but determined to survive. Winter in the village was merciless. Frost coated the streets and snow blanketed the fields, making every step a struggle. Min-jae trudged along, careful not to leave tracks that could betray his family. Korean soldiers' patrols were everywhere, their boots crunching over the frozen ground like distant thunder. Each glance toward the horizon reminded him of their ever-watchful eyes. Inside their small home, the air was thick with hunger and anxiety. Sun-young divided the family's tiny portion of rice, each grain a precious commodity. Hae-won clutched her bowl, her small hands trembling from cold and starvation. Min-jae's stomach ached, but he forced himself to focus. Every ration saved, every secret movement, was an act of survival. That evening, under the dim light of a flickering lantern, Min-jae began marking a crude map on the floorboards. He traced the river, the tree line, and the small paths between villages. Pieced together from whispered stories and fleeting observations, each mark carried the weight of hope and danger. His pulse raced with every imagined step outside the village, every potential encounter with Korean soldiers. Jun-soo noticed his son's careful plotting. You must be careful, Min-jae. Curiosity is a risk, he warned softly, yet there was pride in his eyes. But courage can also save lives. The words ignited a determination within the boy, a resolve to protect Hae-won at all costs. Through the window, the moonlight danced across the snow, casting long shadows. Min-jae imagined the world beyond the fences, beyond the patrols. A place where children could play freely and families could eat without fear. He pressed a hand to the cold glass, feeling both the weight of oppression and the pull of possibility. That night, Min-jae hid a small piece of rice beneath the floorboards for Hae-won. It was a quiet rebellion, a secret act of love in a world that punished kindness. In that small gesture, hope found a foothold. North Korea's frozen grip, a boy and his sister clung to dreams, quietly planning the first daring steps toward freedom, while the Korean soldiers continued their watchful patrols. Min-jae sat huddled in the corner of their dimly lit home, listening intently to the whispers that seeped through the cracks of the wooden walls. The village had grown quieter in recent weeks. Neighbors who once dared to smile had disappeared, taken by the Korean soldiers for reasons no one could explain. The weight of fear pressed down on every household, but for Min-jae, it also sharpened his resolve. A trader, an older man with eyes like shadows, had stopped by that night, speaking softly about a secret route along the river that led toward the northern border. Few make it, he said, voice trembling with both excitement and caution. But those who do, find freedom. Min-jae's heart raced. Could it really be possible? Could they escape the relentless surveillance, the hunger, the endless fear? At home, Sun Yang quietly packed a small bundle of rice, dried fish, and a tattered blanket. She looked at Min Jae with a mix of fear and hope. "If you go," she whispered, "promise me you will watch over Haewon. Keep her safe no matter what." The boy nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. He could feel the fear of Korean soldiers pressing in from every direction, yet the possibility of freedom shimmered like a fragile flame. Jinsu, silent as ever, placed a heavy hand on Min Jae's shoulder. "Courage is rare, son," he said softly, "and love makes it stronger. Remember why you go. Remember who you protect." Min Jae's eyes filled with determination. The path ahead was dangerous, but he knew he had to try. That night, as the village slept under the watchful eyes of Korean soldiers, Min Jae traced the river's course in his mind. Every bend, every shadowed grove, every possible patrol route was memorized. Haewon slept beside him, unaware of the plan forming in her brother's mind. He held her hand briefly, promising himself silently that he would lead her to safety. In the silence, hope took root in the boy's heart. The journey ahead was uncertain, the dangers immense, yet the whispered plan brought a spark of possibility. For the first time, Min Jae felt that freedom, once a distant dream, was a choice he could reach for, even under the oppressive shadow of Korean soldiers. The icy wind cut through the village as Min Jae and Haewon approached the river under the cover of darkness. Their small bodies moved silently, footprints quickly covered by fresh snow. Every crack of ice, every rustle of a tree branch made Min Jae's heart pound. He imagined Korean soldiers lurking, waiting to snatch them back into the relentless grip of the regime. Haewon clutched his hand, shivering from the cold and fear. "Are we really going to cross it?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Min Jae nodded, trying to mask his own terror. He'd studied the river for weeks, memorizing the shallow points, the hidden paths where the soldiers rarely patrolled. This crossing was their first test, and any mistake could mean capture, or worse. They crept closer to the water, the moonlight glinting off its frozen surface. Min Jae noticed cracks forming in the ice, hidden dangers that could swallow them whole. He knelt, testing each step with a stick, careful to avoid weak spots. The river seemed alive, threatening yet inviting, a boundary between the life they knew and the freedom they sought. Behind them, the distant sound of Korean soldiers' boots reminded Min Jae of the stakes. Every nerve in his body screamed to turn back, yet he pressed forward. He wrapped Haewon's scarf tightly around her, whispering, "We can do this. Stay close, trust me." Halfway across, the ice groaned beneath their weight, sending tremors up Min Jae's legs. Fear surged, but he held his sister's hand firmly, guiding her across each precarious step. The cold bit into their skin, their breath forming clouds that mingled with the mist above the river. When they finally reached the far bank, they collapsed into the snow, hearts pounding, lungs burning. For a moment, there was silence, a fragile victory born of courage and determination. Min Jae held Haewon tightly, tears freezing on his cheeks. The river behind them had been a deadly barrier, yet it had also become the first step toward a life they could finally call their own, away from hunger, fear, and the oppressive gaze of Korean soldiers. The journey was far from over, but the spark of hope had been ignited. Min Jae knew that if they could survive the river, they could survive anything. The forest stretched before them like a dark, endless sea. Min Jae and Haewon moved cautiously, stepping over roots and through thick underbrush, every snap of a twig echoing like a gunshot in the still night. Behind the trees, the faint lights of Korean soldiers' patrols glimmered intermittently, a constant reminder that one misstep could send them back into the regime's cruel hands. Haewon clung tightly to her brother's arm, her small body trembling. "I'm scared," she whispered, tears streaking her frozen cheeks. Min Jae swallowed hard and forced a smile, masking the terror that twisted his stomach. "I know, but we have to keep going," he said softly. "We're almost there. Freedom is waiting for us." The forest was a maze of shadows, each bend hiding potential danger. Min Jae had memorized the map drawn from whispered stories, but even so, every step was filled with uncertainty. Imagine the consequences of being caught. Families torn apart, villages punished, whispers of fear spreading faster than the snow. Yet the thought of Haewon's safety drove him onward, stronger than any fear. They paused near a stream, using its flowing water to mask their movements. The cold seeped into their bones, but Minja's resolve did not waver. He whispered instructions to Haewon, guiding her through the maze of trees, teaching her to step lightly, to breathe quietly, to trust the path he had memorized. Suddenly, a distant shout pierced the air, a Korean soldier calling out. Minjae froze, heart hammering. Shadows shifted among the trees, and for a terrifying moment, he thought they had been discovered. But the soldiers moved past, unaware of the two children hiding in the brush. Relief washed over him, and he pressed Haewon close, feeling the warmth of her small body against his own. Oh no, not he. In that frozen forest, under the cold gaze of the moon, Minjae realized the truth of survival. Hope could exist even in the darkest shadows. Every step forward, every silent breath, brought them closer to freedom. The forest tested their courage, but it also strengthened it, planting the seed of belief that one day they could escape the oppressive world of Korean soldiers forever. After hours of trudging through the dense forest, Minjae spotted a hollow beneath a fallen tree, partially covered by a blanket of snow. Over here, he whispered, guiding Haewon toward the hidden shelter. Inside, the air was damp and musty, but it offered the one thing they desperately needed: concealment. The forest outside seemed endless, but within this tiny nook, they could finally catch their breath. Haewon shivered violently, and Minjae pulled the tattered blanket around her shoulders. "We're safe for now," he murmured, though his own teeth chattered. He glanced through a gap in the hollow, spotting the faint glow of Korean soldiers' lanterns moving in the distance. Every shadow reminded him of the stakes, yet the shelter gave them a moment of respite, a fragile pause in their dangerous journey. Minjae rummaged through his small pack, offering Haewon a piece of dried fish. She ate hesitantly, each bite a reminder of how long it had been since they had real food. The hunger gnawed at them both, but in this tiny sanctuary, they allowed themselves to feel a flicker of relief. He spoke softly about the world beyond the forest, painting pictures of open fields, warm houses, and children laughing without fear. Haewon's eyes widened as she imagined it. "Do you really think we'll see it?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Shh," Minjae nodded. "I promise we will. Just have to stay quiet, stay smart." Outside, the snow continued to fall, muffling distant sounds and wrapping the forest in a blanket of silver. For the first time since leaving their village, Minjae felt a glimmer of hope, not just survival, but a life where Haewon could be safe, where they could breathe without fear of Korean soldiers.
Ow.
As they huddled together in the hidden shelter, the boy and his sister allowed themselves to dream. The journey ahead was perilous, but for the first time, the darkness did not seem endless. Somewhere beyond the forest, freedom waited, and they would reach it one careful, courageous step at a time. The forest finally gave way to an open field, blanketed in thick snow. Minjae paused, squinting into the pale moonlight. The wide expanse was both liberating and terrifying. There were no trees to hide behind, no shadows to conceal them. Every step they took could be seen by patrolling Korean soldiers, and every breath seemed louder in the quiet night. Haewon's small hand gripped his tightly. "I'm scared," she whispered, her voice trembling. Minjae knelt and looked into her eyes. "I know, but we've come this far. It's one more step, and we'll be closer to safety. Trust me." He guided her carefully, teaching her to move like the wind, silently and swiftly, barely disturbing the snow beneath their feet. The cold bit at their exposed faces, frost forming on eyelashes and eyebrows. Minjae's body ached from fatigue, but he ignored it, focusing solely on Haewon. Every shadow, every distant sound, every ripple in the snow kept him alert. He thought of their village, of the Korean soldiers' harsh discipline, of the hunger that had chased them for months, and he vowed silently that they would not go back. Suddenly, a distant howl of a dog echoed across the field. Minjae froze, heart hammering. The patrol was near, and they had no cover. He motioned for Haewon to crouch low. Together they flattened themselves against a small rise, holding their breath as the sound passed. Relief washed over them as the danger slipped away, but the field still lay ahead, vast and exposed. Each careful step brought them closer to the forest on the far side, where freedom seemed possible. Minjae whispered words of encouragement to Haewon, reminding her that courage was not the absence of fear, but moving forward despite it. Inch by inch, they crossed the open field, hearts racing and hopes swelling. The first glimpse of the forest's edge sparked a renewed determination. They were almost there. The world beyond the reach of Korean soldiers awaited, and they would step into it together. Min-jae and Haewon reached the edge of the forest. As the first light of dawn painted the sky in pale gold, the trees provided cover, their branches whispering in the morning breeze, and beyond them lay the open world, the world without fear, without Korean soldiers watching their every move. Min-jae exhaled, a weight lifting from his chest, as if the forest itself had carried their terror away. Haewon stumbled, exhausted from the long night, and Min-jae caught her in his arms. "We made it," he whispered, tears freezing on his cheeks. She clung to him, shivering, but a small smile broke through her weariness. In that moment, the months of hunger, fear, and endless running faded into a fragile sense of hope. They moved cautiously, avoiding patrols, but the forest seemed kinder now, less menacing. The snow crunched softly beneath their feet, masking their sounds, and the distant hills promised safety. Every step was careful but deliberate, each one carrying them further from the oppressive grasp of the Korean soldiers and closer to life as they had imagined it. As they emerged from the forest into a small remote village across the border, they were greeted by curious but friendly faces. People who had known nothing but feared themselves offered food, blankets, and shelter. For the first time, Min-jae and Haewon felt the warmth of genuine safety. They could rest without glancing over their shoulders, eat without measuring every bite, breathe without panic. Min-jae held Haewon tightly, feeling the weight of their journey and the strength of their survival. The horrors of their past lingered in memory, but the promise of tomorrow was brighter than they had dared to dream. They had escaped the relentless oppression of Korean soldiers, the hunger and the fear. In that small, distant village, under the gentle light of dawn, Min-jae and Haewon finally understood what freedom felt like: raw, fragile, and infinitely precious. Their journey had been perilous, their courage tested at every turn, but together they had crossed the line from despair to hope. And in that hope, they found the beginning of a new life, where the shadow of the past no longer dictated the promise of tomorrow.